Welcome to Your Brand Amplified, the podcast where we interview marketers, publicists, and brands to learn their stories, what makes them tick, and tips and tricks that make a difference. I am so thrilled to have a semi-retired entrepreneur from the UK, Jan Cavelle, here with me today. Jan, thank you so much.
Oh, I've been so looking forward to it, Annika. I'm thrilled to be here.
I've been looking forward to it as well. I'm really excited to hear how you started on your journey to entrepreneurship. And we'll start there because otherwise I'll just keep throwing questions at you.
Well, it was a bit of a drifting start, should I say, because I was self-employed a lot of the time before my marriage, hated going out to work, just thought it was much easier to earn some income, wasn't very career-minded, and I didn't know anything about business, but I thought, if you've got something to sell, then, whether you buy it in or whether you make it or whether you do it, that sounds okay. And then I'll get paid a bit and then I can do what I want, and that was really my thoughts behind the whole thing.
Wow.
But of course, having done that, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. And so I also drifted in and out of jobs when I was sufficiently broke. And they were nearly always sales jobs, which I am so grateful for. They weren't always very nice sales jobs, but they gave me so much experience. Mm-hmm. And, I think some understanding of selling when you're running a business. Sales is so maligned now, but I think it's a tremendous asset to have. So I'm grateful for that. But yeah, later on, I find myself a single mum.
Familiar.
But yeah, two small kids. What ages were they? They were about 7 and 5. And so very young still. And I was completely broke and very stuck. And so I thought, well, same thing will work. I've got to go self-employed, but I'm going to have to do it better and more seriously. And I can do it at home and look after kids at the same time. So it's selling something on the phone. And that's how the whole thing started. That was my start to a business. And so I decided to put together bits and pieces of furniture and crafts and sort of decorative items, I suppose is a good phrase, that I could buy in locally and sell to interior designers. And I did that for a few years, really, probably not sure how long. But gradually, I got also a friend involved who was finishing some of the furniture. So, it still wasn't manufacturing to me. But, we were just messing around. Sometimes I did the deliveries, driving the van all over Britain. And sometimes he did. And sometimes we hired somebody. And it was just having a nice life, Wow. But it was important that we focused on making money for the kids. And so that's why I started to grow the sales very seriously. And as they got older, then I suddenly got an opportunity to buy out one of my manufacturers, which sounds so much grander than it was.
Yes, it does sound quite grand.
It does. But he was only tiny. He was only sort of a bit my size, if you like, in that there was him and he had a couple of people working for him. But, he was established. He had a lot of machinery and he made all of the stuff that we were selling, or 80, 90% of it. Oh. And it was that or nothing because he gave me absolutely zero warning. He literally arrived on my doorstep one Friday afternoon and said, hey, I've got to tell you something. I said, what? I'm retiring this weekend. What do you mean you're retiring this weekend? It was a bit eccentric. I thought, this is a good one, even for you. And he said, I'm not going to be there Monday. And I said, okay, what about our furniture? That's crazy, Stop it. And we had several cups of tea and I tried to calm him down a bit. And I said, would you be interested? I haven't got any cash. I can pay you on the never out of sales. And, just went for it in a spur of the moment because I was so panicked that I'd have no supply.
Right.
And therefore no income, really. It wasn't the most tremendously organized business launch of something more seriously. But of course, then I did have two businesses and I looked and thought, this is just chaotic. And the kids are a bit older. They were in their teens. I don't know if you've got teenage kids, but probably too young. But, it all of a sudden you sort of start merging into a taxi service rather than being needed to be there all day,
I have a 15-year-old.
And so it seemed a good moment to grow our business. And that's how it became into being a sort of what I call my serious business.
That's your serious business. You're talking, this is where you went to multi-million dollars.
That's right.
Yeah. Wow.
From that chaotic beginning.
I haven't heard very many stories like that, if any, where somebody just comes to you and says they're closing up shop.
I know.
Wow. Wow. But the fact that you had the foresight to realize, okay, I need to step in and do something, that they were willing to work with you on what kind of deal to structure.
Yeah, like I said, I just remember making a lot of tea and having a lot of discussions and, not almost stopping for thought because, he'd just reached a point of meltdown and he'd had enough and he wanted to go. So he wasn't making a lot of sense, which is fair enough. But, sort of, chaotic discussion and, what could we do? What about the two guys working for you who I knew? And actually one of them was part of his family, which made it worse. So he was dumping him, which, he did feel guilty about, but how bad a state he was in.
Yeah.
But, that was all a bit tricky. And, and then, of course, I had to go in on a Monday morning and say, hi, I'm here and you're working for me now. And I can't remember whether I found out from him or from one of them knew and the other one didn't. Because he had told the family member who had got hell from his wife because he thought he might inherit it. But so that was the one complexity. And the other guy had no warning whatsoever. He was just looking at me going, what?
Yeah, he would have just shown up and not had any work and no paycheck. Wow.
Yeah, I know you wouldn't be allowed now, but he'd never bothered to set up with contracts or anything, How he got away with it, heaven only knows. So that all needs sorting out. But yeah, it was crazy. Yeah. Absolutely crazy. So it was shock all around. And I was trying to adjust and, say it's out of saw roughly because that was about as much as I knew about woodwork.
So then how did you take that company? I'm assuming they both stayed with you?
Yeah, I tried for literally a little while. I was going, as I say, school-run taxi service, all the social life that goes with it in the teens. So 24-hour social taxi. And I had my original couple of people on the finishing side in a barn. And now I had this other barn, but they were all scattered, I had sort of one person or one group of people over here, one school run here, one group of people there, me trying to sort of collate the whole thing from home. And it clearly was just impossible. So my first thought was, oh, well, that's easy. I permanently thought things were easy when they weren't. Terrible optimist. But I thought, well, we'll get a little unit in the middle and we'll move us all in there and it'll all be hunky-dory and so easy. And of course, curious enough, when you're building a business, landlords look at you and say, well, you've got no track record.
Right.
And in those days, too, you're a woman and a single mother and we're absolutely not going to touch you with a barge pole. So it was a battle to get a unit, but we got one in the end. And there we were, I think there were 5 or 6 of us and we moved in and it was snowing. I remember it was freezing and this empty factory building and just coming up to Millennial that December and looking around and thinking, God, what have I done? This is crazy. This is this huge building, and now I've got to really pull the rabbits out of the hat because I've got to support this place.
Yeah.
So it was a battle. It was an all-out battle to get it off the ground in a new way. We'd had the initial battle, to keep a roof over our head.
Right.
But this was another battle to get a factory going.
Yeah. Well, and then how did it work? So you all got in there and then how did you scale the business? And then did you end up, now we're going on 23 years later. Did you sell it eventually?
I sort of sold the brand. Oddly enough, I've ended up a little bit like Ted, the guy who used to own the original woodworking. I pretty well burned out myself and just had enough, and the children had gone by this time. And I was thinking, I'd seesawed on selling it for about 5 years, to be honest, and thinking, shall I? Is that sensible? People would go, no, it's your pension, which of course you can't rely on. That is very bad advice. But, people will tell you that, and then I'd think, oh, well, I'll build it up further, that'll be wonderful. I'll get more money. I've got to do something. And then I think, I'm so tired. I've so had enough, just gone. So yeah, in the end, I just competitor wanted the brand particularly, and he took a few staff with him, and we sort of struck a deal for a sort of special deal. He didn't want all the. We did actually take some of the machinery, I think, but he broke it up a bit. But it was a brand that was worth the money, which is one of the reasons I started talking to you, because really, a lot of the old machinery we still had from a buyout.
Wow.
So it wasn't particularly exciting. And, factory unit's a factory unit. So the thing of value that I'd built was the actual brand.
Yeah. Yeah. And it started all from your kitchen table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was the challenge. But, when you get on that roller coaster,
right,
and we'd got the first factory and we were going for it, and we started getting things right because I guess I'd had a fair amount of time to sort of mentally prep. I knew what was working and what wasn't. And so all of a sudden it snowballed, and I was in about 3 years, if that, I think. We needed more space. We needed another factory.
Oh my gosh.
Which seems just, crazy to go from looking around and thinking, what have I done? This is a disaster, to needing more, and as I say, it was 18 months, I think, 2 years.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Wow. And when you think back about how you started and the leadership involved in going from, somebody who had entrepreneurial journeys and sometimes worked for other companies and then becoming a single mom and having to really make sure that you could provide for yourself and your family.
Yeah.
And run a business. What are some of the leadership challenges? Because you talked about being a woman and not having a track record.
Wow, were they leadership challenges? Yes. Because, of course, necessarily in manufacturing, at many points in time, I had an all-male staff.
Wow.
All-male team, so that'd be 40, 50 men and me, and that's okay when it goes well and not okay when it goes badly.
Yeah. Wow.
So there are challenges surrounding that. I think if things are going well, both business-wise and, for relationship with them and everything, you can play the nurturer, which is what we tend to fall into naturally. And, everything's hunky-dory. The moment there's challenges, be it a sort of bouncy time in the business, which over the years you do have, or, you're actually saying, hold on a second, these figures up. Then it's just a woman, she's been hysterical, So, yeah, it was difficult. And I think, I was very ignorant, and I tried to, sort of as things grew, I did try and learn and go on courses and what have you and develop my leadership and stuff. But, by that time, we were all talking about vision and inspiring people and everything else. But the bottom line is that's great in, a marketing company or a social media company or a tech company or whatever. An awful lot of people working in manufacturing actually just want to do a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. It's much more transactional. Yeah. They really couldn't give a hoot what the company's doing. They just want to be able to collect their pay on a Friday night and, that's it. So all the stuff we learn about leadership now is not always very easy to apply to manufacturing, I think. It's a very tough gig.
Well, and that's a really important point because in this day and age, we're seeing that the younger people coming up, they do want to feel like they work somewhere with meaning in their jobs.
Absolutely.
But they also want to make sure they have a fair wage. But when we look at the jobs that are going to be out there, they are far more of the service industry, the manufacturing, working with your hands. Those are the jobs we need people in. And those are not the jobs people are necessarily going into nowadays.
No. Very much not.
I don't know that there's an answer, that there's no magic wand, right? But
there isn't. No, I was saying it, just sort of towards the end of my time with the company, I guess, and there were some sort of probably old Gen Zs, if you like, that sort of band coming into business, and really lovely people. But, they were wanting something completely different. And there was a big culture clash between, them and the other people. And, they couldn't create, and I couldn't create what they needed, with a whole lot of people turning up for the Friday night drink, not much else, It's a tough one. I think manufacturing has to be one of the tougher gigs to go into, to be honest. For anybody, probably for men as well. So
when you sold off part of the company, what did you do next?
Oh, yeah, when I finally had enough and thought, and this guy approached me and said, you thinking of selling by any chance? Yeah, I thought I'd retire because I was so tired. Mm-hmm. That stretch of time, 25 years, single mom and running your own business. I was just dog tired. I couldn't imagine not being tired again, to be honest. So, initially, I think I just took to my bed, not much else. But I realized that what I'd been missing was writing, because I'd been writing as a sort of stress relief while I had the business. And I'd written articles particularly for a magazine over here called Real Business. And actually, that's the one thing I know I'm done with business. I don't want to build a business and put all that energy in again. That's not where I'm at, being there, done there, which might help somebody else do it, not for me. Mm. But, for writing, absolutely. I thought, I need to write still. What is the matter with me? Can't I just write to a friend? It's like an addiction. So yeah, I thought, well, I'll have a go at putting something together, because I'd become really fascinated by the problems I'd seen about, from my own point of view, what had happened in my business, and also what had happened to a lot of friends' businesses. And they were struggling to grow that extra bit. They might have been successful and got up to 1, 2, 3, even 5 mil turnovers. But, then something was wrong. They couldn't push it on from there. And their life became a real nightmare, much as it happened with me. It was very, very taxing, and one couldn't get it quite to run as it should do for the next day. And so I became obsessed with this. And I thought, I want to talk to as many people as possible. And I did all this research simply for my benefit, really. And then I thought, still writing my articles. I've got all this research. Should I really do something about it? Because I've taken up a lot of people's time. So, one of these serendipity things, I vaguely put a book submission together, started to email it to 2 or 3 contacts. And one of them bounced. This is seriously. And it bounced back at me. So, it was just before Christmas, and I was quite tired. And I thought, I'd done the submissions there. So, that irritation when you see the damn things bounce when you spend hours on. So I tweeted and I said, do you know your email's not working? And I got this lovely message back on Twitter saying, actually, I'm a junior business editor here. Can I help you? And would you like my private email address?
Oh.
And that was Brilliant Publishing.
Wow.
So
that also shows you had a passion for writing. You knew that you could help other entrepreneurs because, let's face it, a lot of times what you learn, and you didn't go to university for this.
No, I was so ignorant in the beginning. And it goes to show that, there's a lot of entrepreneurs, I think now agree that university is not necessarily the best, or it's certainly not the only, let's be tactful about this, not the only breeding ground for entrepreneurs.
Well, yeah, I teach university, but I always try to bring in, because I have the practical application, because I work in the field, I always try to bring in the case studies and the real life experiences so that
makes
they're not just getting, because I think a lot of times university is about theory. It's not about the practice, and practice is so very different. So you were able to take all of your practical applications and knowledge and put it into a book. And this shows the value of relationships as well, and follow up. You didn't just say, oh, they bounced. Okay, I give up. You said, I'm going to figure out how to reach this person. And that turned into a book.
Yeah, and it did. And, I was incredibly lucky with Bloomsbury with the first book. I mean, that was just crazy. But also I was so grateful to the people who had contributed their time and their knowledge, and hugely successful people, because, I wanted to know the right way, or, what did people say about how to sell a business correctly? What were the pitfalls, and so on and so forth. What could people tell me about marketing, and, where it works and where it doesn't, or whatever. I'd got my experiences and my viewpoints, but I didn't want to just run it on my viewpoint. I wanted to add other people's.
Very nice. And so your first book launched 2 years ago, and it was Scale for Success.
Scale for Success, it was. And then I'd said to Bloomsbury originally, what I really want to do is write too, because by the time I'd done a lot of research for Scale, I realized that where I'd gone wrong, and where, dare I say, a lot of people go wrong, is because they're not either knowledgeable or they don't think they're going to grow. Goodness knows I didn't, for whatever reason. Their business foundations aren't strong enough. And so with a good run and a fair wind, you can get this tremendous surge of growth, and, you can build a substantial business. But that's what makes it really hard work later on, because you're old, house on shaky foundations, and you're forever shoring things up, wishing you could go back to the beginning and getting it right.
Right.
And so that became the other half. Start for Success is more for people a little bit earlier, started or not started yet, putting it in right. And there were some brilliant people, because again, I brought in lots of other people and wonderful stories, from fabulous entrepreneurs who have such entertaining stories to tell, as you know.
Yeah.
And it makes it easy to learn.
And Start for Success launched this year in 2020.
It did. Yeah, absolutely.
So what has the journey been like since you have launched 2 books now? Are you doing workshops? Are you helping entrepreneurs with coaching them through their businesses? Are you doing a lot of speaking engagements?
I do a bit. I mean, I always did, or not always, but about halfway through when I started sort of getting recognized on the business circuit and, you start to win awards and what have you. And, part of it, of course, is about pushing your brand out there. But I was also asked to join enterprise campaigns to help others, be it in schools or universities or small business groups or whatever. I mean, that was a long time ago now, but I got involved in doing that both in the UK and in the EU. And I loved it, and I didn't see that there was any point in stopping because, if anything, I was on a sort of crash course several degrees over with my books. I was learning so much more than anybody ever could have done just from that sort of narrow viewpoint that you get in your own business. And so I've kept on going with, I go out and I speak and what else do I do? Promote the book, but at the same time, actually hope to give value. I mean, I still do the odd sales work because it's my thing and I love it, but I also do growth ones and, just generally help people out and a bit of mentoring when somebody reaches out to me. At one point, I did a whole sales training. I clearly did the sales training, but a coach training. Mm-hmm. But I would rather be a mentor than a coach. Again, I'm not business building, and I'd rather pick and choose and just work with somebody. I'm not very good at not putting my viewpoint, which of course good coaches should shut up and encourage rather than say. But I find it frustrating, when somebody's got a problem selling and it's, in capital letters on the wall, not to tell them. It seems so hard, So yeah, I'd rather be a mentor any day of the week.
Yeah. Well, one thing that we're seeing here in the US is like some of the clients that I work with are starting to scale back a little bit because they're worried. Of course, over here we have the debt ceiling issue, but also just looking at new technologies, what AI is going to do. What is the world economy going to be doing in the next few years? Is there going to be another pandemic? How is the different wars, particularly Russia-Ukraine war, going to continue to affect everything that we do on a day-to-day basis? So what advice do you have for somebody who's looking to start a business and scale a business? So I guess that's two questions. In this economic time where there's people with great wealth and doing really well, but there's also a lot of uncertainty.
I think you're so right. I think people are feeling that over here too. And it's more than understandable, we're in an extraordinary time, shall we say. But yes, I do think it's a good time to start a business actually, because even if you start a side hustle, which is why a lot of people are going, it gives you some sort of indemnity and control over your own life, should you be unlucky enough to be made redundant because of AI or because for any other reason that your company's cutting back, then you've got something that you can build on. Mm-hmm. And or if you're looking at your company and thinking, I'm sure they're not going to be around in 2 years' time, do the planning, do the maths, think about going out on your own. So I think it's a wonderful time to start a business for lots and lots of reasons. My very first article for this year was why it is a good time to start a business, because I do believe that.
I'm going to have to link to some of your articles in the show notes.
Yeah, no, they're all on my website, so anybody interested can find that. And I can't remember what, whether there were 20 reasons to start a business this year or 30 reasons to start a business this year, but there are a lot. I'm a firm believer it's a very good time. And risk-wise, yes, I mean, we are at risk, but from lots and lots of things. There's no doubt about that. But I think you need to think about two things. I think a lot of the tech companies expanded incredibly fast. And I know what that's like because I did it myself when we took the second factory on.
Right.
And, you start being terribly busy everywhere and you start flinging people at the problem. And of course, flinging people at the problem is not the answer, because all you get is a very large wage bill and people standing around going, what am I supposed to be doing? And nobody having a capacity or the knowledge really to be effective. Stone low productivity, and I think probably what a lot of, I was contemplating naming some, but I don't think I will. I won't get myself into trouble. But one or two of the tech companies are seeing that and deciding to streamline and get rid of the fat, if you like, which was almost inevitable after the wave, the sort of boom to prevent the bust.
I have a friend who works for Meta, and she was from the United States. She took a job in the UK office in London.
Right.
And she was made redundant. Luckily, in the UK, you have a lot more protections for employees.
There's certainly very good protection. You don't have that.
No, because here she would have just been let go and that's it, and maybe gotten a small severance. But there was a much better process to really help her figure out the next step. get a job and be treated fairly, because she uprooted her entire life to move there for this position, spent lots of money of her own, getting her, and she's now in the UK going, how much longer can I stay here? And how expensive is it going to be for me to move myself back to the States if that's what I have to do? And all these other questions. So that adds just another layer of complexity. But yeah, we're seeing so many different companies do that, where they're staffing up all over and then they're trying to make people redundant everywhere. And at the same time, they're being fined. I think Meta was just fined $1.3 billion in the EU for privacy, for misusing people's data. So that's...
You'd think that would hurt, wouldn't you?
Yeah, you would think, okay, well, that instead of doing that, you could continue hiring people, or at least the people that you have, you could keep them and find positions. But
they certainly had to leap around a bit from one thing and another. Meta, but I mean, even more dramatic is what's happened with Twitter. How many people went with that? No, I wouldn't even put a figure on it, but but it's still there, it's still going, and I suspect getting stronger by the minute would be my guess. So, I think to answer your question, there's a very good argument about starting to protect yourself and learning the ability on the side to be able to do it just in case. There can be no better backup, is thinking up what would people still need under those circumstances. And if you're in business or growing a business, I'm reminded of a story from Start for Success, which illustrates it very well, because, you were talking about another pandemic, and I chatted to, among the many, many people I spoke to, hundreds, literally, for the research for Start, but I spoke to a lovely guy who runs a security business across the South of America.
Oh.
Because obviously, he struck me as a very good person to talk about risk, because, of course, that's what they do as a company, is they deal about risks, and he's growing very rapidly too. So, it's a sort of a double perspective. And he was saying at the beginning of the pandemic, he applied what he's always done as an entrepreneur, which, this was really interesting to me, and it made so much sense, is he read the newspapers really hard. And so he saw it coming really, really early and thought, what's the impact that can have in my industry? And he thought, all the things that security people are going to need to do their jobs, the masks and the high vis jackets and the whole caboodle of the supply chain could dry up. And so he invested because he was highly profitable and still is as a result of this, he invested a large amount of capital into stocking up, because he saw a very sensible opportunity that would probably never go to waste, but could turn and make a profitable, which indeed it did.
Wow.
So out of the bad stuff, you can see opportunity, and it's not quite the same as, ripping people off because holding them to ransom. It is a genuine business opportunity, and he dealt with that and dealt with it absolutely brilliantly, So I think that's a really good example of how you should keep calm, but look for opportunities and look to the future all the time. Be one step ahead of the game and be prepared to pivot. See your business as a group of skills. I'll tell you briefly another story.
Yeah, please.
From the same book, which is Australian this time.
Oh.
And this was another pandemic story. And it was a big events company. And they did very complicated stages, for sort of things like big festivals. And, we've all seen them on TV, even if we haven't been. And amazing things for sports events and masses of stuff. And then pandemic hit Australia, probably even faster than most companies. When it hit. And so all his team, every single event they had on cancelled, because they had no sign of any events ever being held again. And he called a company meeting on Friday. And he said to the team, this is the situation. Everybody's cancelled. We have no work, but we have the skills of all of you, and we have the buildings or whatever they work from. And this is an opportunity, same story. Can we put our heads together and think how we could keep as many people from the events industry, which we really care about, in work through this? But we've got to do it now, because we are out of cash, we can't just keep going. And by Saturday morning, they had settled on the fact that a lot of people were going to work at home. Obviously, we didn't know to the extent that people were going to work at home at that point. So there would be a big market for home desks. So they started making, because of course they had the capacity to make from the events, because they made all the staging. They started making desks and home furniture. Wow. They got a brochure out that weekend.
My gosh.
I know. It's all done literally at that speed. And the roadies became their delivery guys.
Wow. Wow.
Isn't that wonderful stories?
Yeah.
They kept going and they actually grew. And I think that the furniture business became bigger. I mean, both are back now than the original events business.
That is
and they're
what
so
a
super
pivot.
successful. But they did that pivot in a weekend.
That's amazing. I've heard about a lot of event companies that moved to trying online events.
Yeah.
But I love that they were able to take other skill sets that they
really out of the box.
Yeah,
but that's what a business is, isn't it? I mean, it's a group of people with skill sets that can be adapted. And I think more people should think about that.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
So,
well, I also want to ask, what does it take to get from that 1, 2, or 3 million to that 10 million plus?
I think it takes a whole load of things. It does take you to develop into a leader. Mm-hmm. Undoubtedly, you're not going to be able to do it without. I think it takes really having nailed your brand differential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think because you can't just sort of throw everything at board and sell anything to anybody at that stage. You have to be able to focus. I think it takes a really good leadership team because you're past the stage when you can be the sole leader. I think it takes that, most entrepreneurs, myself included, obviously hate systems, but you've got to systemize it if you're going to grow. I think those are some of the major points off the top of my head.
No, those are great. I'm laughing because I'm that person who wants to do the big things. And I have like 10 more business ideas written down, right? But I have somebody in my team who's really good at the systems and processes and can figure out what my CEO and I are trying to put together, and she'll just make it happen. Yeah. So you have to have those good people as well.
You do. Yeah. I mean, there's no way, that somebody can run a 10 mil turnover business with no decent people at the top. And what happens, of course, and happened to me, is you tend to hang on for people who you started with, because, or co-partners you started with or whatever. It's comfortable because it's loyal, and isn't that a nice thing to do? But actually they might not necessarily be capable. And what you need if you're growing a business is better skills, probably considerably better than yours. You've got to bring in new talent, otherwise you won't be able to do it.
Yeah. Definitely. And another thing that you talked about is the burnout that your predecessor in the manufacturing business had, the burnout that you had. You're trying to manage 2 teenagers, busy schedules, running 2 companies, growing companies. How did you incorporate mental health and balance? I don't think there's ever a balance. Something always has to give to make something. Yeah. But how do you incorporate, or how do you recommend that entrepreneurs look at that and, infuse that? Because I feel like mental health is something that's important when you're trying to do this work.
Definitely. The short answer to your question is very badly in my case. And the equally short answer is don't do any of the things I did. I think luckily we are becoming more aware of mental health. And even at that point, people were beginning to understand it. But again, in manufacturing, you didn't say, I might have burnout, or I might be stressed, or I might be this. You were a woman, therefore you were hysterical. So you're an absolute loser. And there's also this conviction that, which I think still survives, is that entrepreneurs must be strong. And I think we're our own worst enemy about that as well, because I think we believe that we have to be some sort of super person, and must be able to keep going, and must be able to pick up the pieces, and must be the one to stay late and do everybody else's work. And you have to divest yourself of that. And if you can't do it for you, I think it's easy to see there's a very good argument for the business, because you have to start seeing yourself as a business asset that needs its cogs oily. Wow. And that means taking care of yourself.
That's a really great analogy. Thank you for that. Jan, is there anything else you'd like to share about entrepreneurship and things that people should consider when they're going on this journey?
Well, I think because we're talking brand and marketing, I'd love to just touch on something else that, has become so big. And again, we talk about so much in Start because it's become such a big thing. It's getting customers and potential customers, particularly if you're starting to build a successful business, emotionally involved in your brand, because that didn't exist really as a thing 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
But now it can make a real difference between getting off the ground and not getting off the ground. Should you not think? It's that something that makes them feel.
Yeah.
And that's the key, I think, to success. You've got to make your customers feel. You've got to tell stories that touch their hearts, or make them laugh, or make them desperately want your product, or be aspirational or whatever, but you've got to stir and, just generally give them a little bit extra, something special in life.
Yeah. In the past month, I've done 3 speaking engagements, one to workforce development at a conference, one who are trying to attract businesses to understand what services they can provide and how they can help find the right people for their businesses, one for a group of entrepreneurs, and then this week, one for educators to help adult learners who might need to skill up. They might need certification, stackable credentials. They might need English as a second language, or they might need their high school equivalency.
That's brilliant. Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what industry you're in. You have to help your customer see themselves as a hero in your story and understand that your product is what's going to help them.
Absolutely.
Whether it's a beautiful piece of furniture that's going to be comfortable and something that they and their children are going to love sitting on and playing games together or watching TV together, or whether it is that you are a school that's going to help somebody get to the next level of profession that they want to get in and get the income to provide for their family. So what you're saying is so important.
Yeah. And then, of course, it's such a gift because you've got your marketing, because if your families and your fans are creating stories, then you share those. And that's what people get involved in, is for stories of real life, and develop your ability as a storyteller, I think, is really increasingly important for an entrepreneur now.
Definitely. What is the easiest way for people to follow you on social media or LinkedIn or your website?
Well, I'm very easy to find because there's not very many Jan Cavelles around, which is lovely. Website-wise, I'm even easier still, because if you think I'm in England, and I'm jancavelle.co.uk.
Fantastic.
Drop me an email, jan@jancavelle.co.uk. Okay. My Twitter's Jan Cavelle, my LinkedIn's Jan Cavelle, my Instagram's Jan Cavelle, my Facebook is Jan Cavelle Writer for complicated reasons, but you're going to find me.
Yeah. Wonderful. And we will also link to your books in the show notes.
Thank you.
Because I think those will be a wonderful resource. And my last question, do you have a favorite quote or mantra, words of wisdom?
I think, it would be appropriate. I mean, I've got so many, but I think, for your wonderful show, I think the right thing to say would be, that remember, branding is really a personality plus visibility. And I think if you can get your head around that, then you're on the right track.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. I've so enjoyed our conversation, and I have not read your books yet, but they're now on my list. Jan, I've just really enjoyed our conversation and the transparency that you bring to this conversation about what entrepreneurship is really like and the tools and tactics that you have to make it successful.
Absolutely. I think people, benefit from knowing, it isn't a walk in the park, but it's a wonderful life.
Yeah, awesome. And to the audience, thank you for listening to another episode of Your Brand Amplified. I'll be back again in a few days with another amazing expert guest. Want more? Check out amplifywithannika.com or follow me on socials at amplifywithannika.